Right now, so many of us are stuck. We're caught between wanting to nourish ourselves and this beautiful planet, but feeling lost in the noise of modern convenience, chemical farming, and endless monocrops. The way we grow food today is failing both us and the earth. We feel it in our bodies and we see it in the land around us. If you've ever felt the tug of wanting something more, something that's truly connected to the earth, to community, and to your own well-being, then this episode is for you. What if there's a different way? A way that not only heals the earth, but also nourishes our souls. Today, I'm thrilled to share a conversation that dives deep into this question. I'm your host, Nathan Maingard. Welcome back to We Are Already Free, the podcast for those awakening to the madness of modern society, struggling with disconnection from their true selves, yearning for more. Here we go beyond hopelessness, overwhelm, and limiting old patterns, inspiring you to live authentically, find your tribe, and create a beautiful life in the here and now. When you hear We Are Already Free, what comes up for you?
Acceptance.
The shift in awareness.
Human beings are so powerful. Everything is love behind it.
Breaking the chains of your own minds.
That which remains.
Nature.
Getting out of the matrix.
Sitting on the treasure and it's already unlocked.
We are already free.
You're free.
You are a walking map.
Have always been free.
You are always free, already free.
We are already free.
I'm joined by Mollie Engelhart, a chef, a farmer, and a regenerative pioneer who has walked a bold path from being a dedicated owner of a vegan restaurant to embracing regenerative agriculture. In this episode, Mollie shares her journey of rethinking everything she knew about food, healing her soil, and ultimately healing herself. We'll uncover how regenerative agriculture is so much more than just a buzzword. It's a way to build resilience in our ecosystems and resilience within ourselves. We'll talk about the soil microbiome and how it's connected to our health and why this shift towards regeneration might just be the most radical act of hope we can take today. Listen to learn why integrating animals into farming is key to regenerating the land, how the health of our soil directly impacts our gut and mental health, what the challenges are in transitioning from conventional to regenerative farming, and how we can support farmers making that leap. Why true food sovereignty matters, and stick around for a special bonus chat towards the end where Mollie and I dive deep into an incredible discussion around plant medicine's birth and the wisdom of nature. It is not something you want to miss. I was in tears listening to the story she shared. It's so profound. Please do listen to this. It's right at the end. It's so good and so unexpected. And speaking of resilience, if you're ready to start each day in alignment with energy you need to create positive change, let me invite you to my 5-day morning practice challenge. It's designed to transform your mornings in just a few minutes a day so you can face whatever challenges arise with clarity, groundedness, and joy. You can sign up for free through the link in the show notes. I'd love for you to join us. So let's dive into it. Together, let's rethink food, let's heal the soil, and let's explore the radical shift that regenerative living invites us all into. Here's my inspiring, uplifting, and educational conversation with Mollie Engelhart. I know with your restaurants, you've shifted from veganism to regenerative agriculture, so including animals. This is a big thing for so many of us, for myself, and I'm sure many of my listeners who were like, veganism will save the world. If we just be vegan, then everything will be better. I worked in the vegan industry for years. I was like, this is the thing. Why is regenerative agriculture and eating animals such a game changer? Why is it so important that you would move away from veganism as your business?
I was raised primarily vegan, but my mom felt like margarine was plastic. So we ate butter, and she wasn't that she was ahead of the game on not being into seed oils. And so, we did eat butter and then olive oil for raw things as far as cooking when we were growing up. But I was raised in a primarily vegan household. And so I believed that to be what was best. We even were raised on a farm and we were mostly growing apples. And then my uncle had a operation where he raised calves for a dairy farmer down the street. And then once they were old enough to go to market. So there was cows there a lot, and we had this orchard and stuff. But my mom had read a book. My mom had me young, and she had read a book about industrial agriculture and just decided she didn't really want to participate in that. And I grew up in that sphere. So meat never even really occurred like food to me. I was raised with a very rounded whole food diet. My mom made her own tofu, made her own tempeh, fermented things. That was, so I never really missed it. Even the mission statement for my restaurant was like food with nothing missing, but without animal products. And so people could have whatever experience they wanted. If they wanted to eat a fried macaroni and cheese ball that didn't have dairy in it, I had that for them. If they wanted a kale and quinoa salad, I had that. If you wanted a, bourbon on the rocks, I had that. Like I really wanted everybody, grandpa to the kid with the picky kid, I wanted everybody to have something. And that's what I wanted to provide. And I was very successful at that, very successful. And I always asked people what was their vegan kryptonite, what made them cheat. And then I made the greatest version of that I could. That's kind of how I designed my menu. And I have a talent for being able to taste something and then I could go home and make it. And people will be like, how did you do that? We just ate it last night at a restaurant. I can taste everything. And so I was just doing what I love to do. I love to feed people. I love to express love in that way. I don't want to harm animals. I don't want to harm anything, right? And so that was very natural to me. And in 2013 or 14, I watched a Graham Sake TED Talk that blew my mind. He explained about carbon cycling and carbon sequestration and all of this stuff that kind of disrupted what I believed about agriculture. And the main thing that I took away from that talk was that food waste was the number one cause of methane, not cows. And I remember thinking, wow, I have these restaurants and I'm just dumping so much food waste into the landfill. And at that time, there was no composting in Los Angeles. And so I decided to get a farm. And it took many years, money, saving, blah, blah, blah. I would try to get customers to buy a farm for me so I could bring my compost, but realized I was the one I was waiting for. But I was still in the mindset of, I'm going to have this farm. I'm going to rescue animals. They're going to regenerate the soil. Nothing is ever going to die. And I'm going to have this beautiful regeneration of the soil, grow food for my restaurants, take all the waste out of my restaurants and turn it into beautiful soil. And this is going to be amazing. And I was so inspired about it that my husband just let me believe that it was possible. And so we bought this land. It was fallow. It had been an orange orchard, then took out the orange trees and just sprayed with Roundup. And it was just like 0.01% organic matter in the soil. Wow. And I watched very quickly as we were able to regenerate the soil beautifully. And other things happened while I was watching that. I was watching nature. Some things that stand out is, well, first we were making all the compost from the food scraps from the restaurant. And I realized it was taking a long time to break down. And it wasn't the best, highest quality of compost that I could come up with. I was getting a lot of tree trimmings and mulch, and that was beautiful, but it needed something to set it off. So I got a cow from my dad, Una. I still have Una. And Una was bred already. And Una had a beautiful bull calf. And my heart sank, like, well, when the baby was born and it was a boy, I understood, like, what is the boy calf's role in the world? And I am there breastfeeding my own child, and Una has a huge udder. Like, you can go on Instagram and see it's huge. And so her calf wasn't breastfeeding. They don't breastfeed evenly. And so they are, you're milking off the quarter that the cow might not be, and we're milking it off onto the ground or we're saving it and giving it to some farm workers or whatever, because dairy causes cancer. And then I'm sitting there and I'm breastfeeding my child, and I'm watching my older child drink oat milk from Costco in a Tetra Pak that's never going to biodegrade. And I'm seeing this milk, I'm milking it onto the ground or milking it. And I'm thinking, well, if my breast milk is gold, if my breast milk is the most profound immune system benefit to a child, and I'm living in a much cleaner version of where Una's living, why is Una's milk not as good or better? Because she's living in a dirtier version of the world I'm living in, all the same pathogens and whatever that I've got to fight against and my other child's got to fight against, she also has to fight against. So why is her breast milk not more perfect than that Tetra Pak? And it was obvious to me in that moment that it was more perfect, and that I breastfed my son for 2 years and some months, and I was done. I was not going to continue to breastfeed him, but that nutrition, that he still craved drinking milk, and that there was no way that oat milk was not worse for him than cow milk. And so I started feeding raw milk to my children. That was like step one. And I'm still having a vegan restaurant. I'm still not posting that on Instagram or anything. And then other things happened where I'm observing nature and I'm doing things that are against nature. And then I'm seeing the consequences. I've told this story before, but I let my ducks just had more ducks and more ducks. And there's all these boy ducks, a lot of drakes. I got some new female ducks, khaki Campbells, and they're in the avocado orchard and they're eating the snails. And I'm so excited the first day that the khaki Campbells are big enough to go out in the orchard with all the other ducks, and I let them go. And I can still remember this morning, the grass is like knee high and there's snails and they're eating the snails off of the avocado trees, and the sprinklers are going and they're just shivering in the sprinklers. And I remember going off to work thinking, I'm doing so good. This is my regenerative agriculture and I'm not using anything to kill the snails, and my ducks are killing the snails. And because I had so many drakes, so many male ducks, they had sex with all those 19 female ducks until they died, killed all 19 of them. And I was so mad and so sad. You know, when you're raising baby chicks or ducks, you got to check their butt that they don't get blocked. You're taking care of them every day. You're cleaning their water. You're cleaning this. And they're the cutest thing you've ever seen when they're born, and they go through an ugly phase and then they become these beautiful ducks. I went through that whole phase with them, and then I bring them out to their beautiful life that's outside of the swimming tank this like kids swimming pond that they were living in. And their first day, they just get killed. But nature would never have 19 male ducks with 19 female or whatever it was. Every time the ducks were having babies, it was half and half. Nature would not have that. Those male ducks would get pushed out. A stronger duck would fight them off, and one duck would be with many females and the other ducks would get pushed out, and they'd either find females of their own or they will get eaten. But most of them will get eaten or die, but they will not stay with all the female ducks and just breed and breed and breed them over and over till they die. That wouldn't happen. But because of my vegan mentality, I wanted nothing to die on my farm, so these drakes were going to live. Well, the consequence of me having that mindset was that all of my female khaki Campbells were killed that day in a terrible way. When my husband went out there, they were still humping on them and they were dead in the grass. And he called me at work and he said, "You're going to be upset. I'm just letting you know." And I called my dad and I was crying, and my dad had come to a lot of the conclusions that I came to a couple years earlier. And so people love to say, like, you're a murderer just like your dad. But he also had a farm to grow food for his restaurants. My dad owns Cafe Gratitude. It's a famous vegan restaurant as well. And he said, "That's enough to bring a vegan to her knees." And I was like, it is enough to bring a vegan to her knees. And I went home that night and I told my husband, do something about those ducks. And I didn't want to know about it. I didn't want to see about it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want it to be something that anybody ever knew about. Like, I had very publicly said nothing was going to die on my farm except for old age. I was committed to proving that. But I also wasn't committed to raising animals and having them die by being raped over and over again. And people talk about the dairy industry like AI or preg checking is rape. I don't agree with that. That's rape. but a duck being bred over and over and over by a trade of male ducks until they die does occur like rape to me. And so I was just heartbroken. I started to realize that we are not outside of nature. And just because I say I don't want to eat meat does not mean that I can then snap my fingers unless death happens. And then we're buying fertilizer in those early years. After 2.5 years, we were no fertilizer. We didn't buy any fertilizer. But I'm looking at the ingredients on the fertilizer, and it's blood meal, it's bone meal, it's chicken shit, it's feather meal. And so I start to call these Omni certified, organic certified, and I'm saying, where is the blood meal coming from? Where is the chicken poop coming from? Where is the feather meal coming from? It's all coming out of the consolidated feedlot system. It's all a byproduct of a broken agricultural system that we depend on heavily for our convenience and the cheapness of it. And I'm thinking, all organic food is grown with death, the system that I want to be away from. And every bit of food that I'm serving is being grown with that. And if it's not being grown with that, it's being grown with petrochemicals. So I start looking into like veganic farming, and people love to, say there's veganic farming, send me websites on it. And I have seen a few places that had an already established fruit orchard or an already established vineyard that are doing it. And they're, mulching with hay and mulching with chips and whatever. So maybe there's a way to do it. There's a place that collects bat guana or sea guana. But at scale, what are the inputs? Like, what are the inputs if it's not petrochemicals? It's animal products. And then people say, well, we're just mulching with hay. Okay, well, what's growing the hay? Where's the hay coming from? There's all this stuff. There is some circumstances in some parts of the world where there's a lot of rainfall and a lot of organic matter that I suppose that you could do it. But it is not something that we can do at scale across the world everywhere. And in Southern California, where it only rains 3 months of the year, was not one of those places where veganic farming. And then you start looking what's in vegan fertilizer, and it's kelp. It's things we're taking things. There's cost to taking everything. Like the fact that there'd be no death in harvesting kelp from the kelp forest. I don't know. I don't know what the consequences are, but I don't think that we can just say just because in this package there's no death means that there was no death associated. And I started to realize that there is no life without death. But there is ways to farm to promote more life. It doesn't mean there's no death. It means I'm farming for more life. And I'm farming for the benefit of the soil, for the benefit of the animals, for the benefit of humanity. And then I realized that there's a new study that even says 59%, but 25% of life on the planet lives in the top 8 inches of topsoil. New study saying as much as 59% of life on the planet lives in the top 8 inches of topsoil. So you start to think about, we're worried about the whales, we're worried about the polar bears, as we should be. I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of whales and polar bears, 100%. But if 25 to 50% of the life on the planet lives in the top 8 inches of topsoil, and we are plowing through it over and over and over again every year, there's dire consequences to that. And so how big does life have to be for me as a vegan to care about it? That was the next question I had to question and ask myself. How big does the life have to be? Then I learned, I'm on this journey. It's crazy. Of that 25% of life in the soil, and maybe more now, this new study, 70% of it is compatible with a healthy gut. Healthy soil and healthy gut have a 70% overlap. So then I'm thinking, the God in all of us, creation in all of us is in our guts, our gut instinct. Follow your gut. Go with your gut. Trust your gut. That's the God in all of us, or the divine, the creator. We are meant to pick a cabbage out of the ground, rinse it off, ferment it, and eat it. We are not meant to pick a cabbage out of the ground, dip it in sterilizer, HPP, and then wrap it in plastic and then wait to eat it 6 months or whatever. That is what we're doing. And so then I'm thinking, what is in our microbiome? We're creating this industrial microbiome. And then I start going, oh, we're pasteurizing all the dairy. We're not breastfeeding our children. We're C-sectioning our babies. And then I start to think every problem that we're having, mental illness, people going crazy and shooting up schools, people having all types of skin and hair problems, people not being able to get pregnant, it all goes back to that we're disconnected, that our gut is not eating of the soil. We are not connected to creation. And then I think I just have to give my life to being connected to creation. And that's how I got to changing my vegan restaurants to meat restaurants, which is not working financially for me. Just for the record, like we are probably going to have to close them down. It's not working. The vegans are terribly upset with me. And they think I'm doing it for money. And it's interesting. Nobody ever opened a restaurant for money and nobody ever farmed just for money. These are the hardest jobs on the planet. And I have 2 of the hardest jobs on the planet. And I haven't taken a paycheck from either of them in several years. Mm-hmm. So this idea that I'm doing it just for money, I'm doing it because I was led to do it. Mm. The person that was raised eating no meat that comes to this conclusion had to be shown so much evidence to come to this conclusion. This conclusion does not come easy because I was in a confirmation bias feedback loop that did not believe this.
Mm. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear the challenges you're facing because it's the opposite of what I would like to be seeing based on what you're sharing with me. But I actually have a story I want to share that is kind of like, I've got goosebumps. Yes. The episode that came out, well, it'll be a few weeks ago now when this episode comes out. It'll be quite a few episodes ago. But I did a solo episode on my experience of my first time in San Francisco in 2010. There's a whole long story, but I'll link it in the show notes and people can go listen to the full thing. But the point of telling you now is that I made a point when I went to San Francisco. I only had $100 to my name at that time. I didn't know when I was going to be getting more money. It was like a whole thing. I wasn't meant to be doing any work. So there was all this stuff going on. But one of the things I did was I went to Cafe Gratitude in the Mission, I think it was in the Mission District, if I remember. This is now 2010. Because I, as a raw vegan working in the industry since 2007, it was like one of the success stories that I'd heard of. And I had heard, it must have been your dad, on the Raw Summit podcast series where he had been interviewed by someone and they were talking about veganism and raw veganism and why it was so amazing. And your dad's, or whoever it was, I don't know if it was your dad, but it was like
it was my father.
It was your dad. Yeah, it was the owner of Cafe Gratitude. And so I had listened to this a few years before, 2008 or so, that I'd listened to it. The interviewer asked him a question. He said, a lot of people say this lifestyle is expensive. It's expensive to eat well. And your dad's response, which is just blowing my mind that this would come full circle right now. But his response was like, well, you pay now, you pay later, but you always pay. And he said, either you pay now for the high quality food that's going to keep you healthy and vibrant and alive, or you pay later for the cancer, the doctors, the hospitals, the chemo, like all the other things. Or you pay cheap now, but you pay for the poisoned rivers and the poisoned land and the polluted air. And I just thought it was, I've told that story so many times when people have, and it's funny because it stayed with me even as I realized pretty soon, like around 2010 was when I started being like, there's more to the story, and veganism and raw veganism isn't it for me, and eating meat responsibly, regeneratively makes way more sense for me personally and all those things. But that story has stayed true, that when people say to me like, oh,
but it's still true. It's whether you're eating raw, vegan, organic. And I'm saying that every person has to see what their body responds to. Mm. I have watched people heal themselves from autoimmune diseases and thyroid issues from bringing meat into their diet. And I have watched people cure themselves of cancer from going on juice fast. So I want to say that is value in many different ways to eat. There's also immense amount of privilege to only be able to eat. I'm only going to eat blah, 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 blah.
Right.
That comes from a place where you have plenty, that you can say, this food, I don't eat it, and this food I do. And I recognize that. But my father is 100% correct. There is a cost to everything. And so if you buy the corn tortillas at the store that are $2 for 30 or whatever the cost of those tortillas, or you buy my tortillas that are $8 for 30, there's a difference. We grew the corn here on the farm, and that's what you're getting. And that other one, there's all these other ingredients, and that cost is not just on your body, but it's all through the system. The guy who sprayed that corn with Roundup and had to put a suit on, the way they clean it, the chemicals that are involved, and all the people that touch it along the way, and then yourself. And so we don't know what the true cost is. And so we can't just say this food is a privilege to eat this healthy food or this whatever, and this food is what people need to do. It is a privilege to say I'm only going to eat this certain kind of food, but it's also a privilege to eat cheap food that other people are touching chemicals and getting sick to produce for you. And that is happening with migrant workers in the United States. They come here, they work in the fields, and then they go home with sickness, with cancer, with all of these things after working in producing our cheap food. I had a woman that cleaned my house, and she was on a team of 5 women that did pick strawberries. And of the 5 women, 4 of them had had a bout with cancer before 50. And so you look at that rate, and it's because of the fungicides that they're touching that are killing the microbiology in our body. That microbiology that is of the soil that's in us is what keeps our skin bag that houses our soul alive. And so it's perfection. But when we mess with it and we're touching fungicides every day, we're killing off part of that microbiology, and then it becomes imbalance and it becomes dis-ease. And so I talk about that a lot, and that it's not as simple as just saying it's a privilege to eat that. It's also not as simple as saying it's not a privilege to eat cheap food, because cheap food is also a privilege. We have this addiction to convenience, and we need to trade our convenience for resilience, but we're addicted to just the laziness of it. And so I don't know how to get people to change. Thought the restaurant people would be like, oh my God, convenience, and I can have the thing. And they're literally complaining that my hamburger is $2 more than the regular hamburger down the street. And it's like, my food cost is not even in line. I was trying to introduce it and then hopefully get to the true food cost, and people just don't see the value. And so I don't know how to get there, but my father is 100% right. We will pay now or we will pay later. And I'm 46 years old, and I just had my 4th biological child. I have 1 adopted son. And I believe that I'm still having babies in my mid-40s because whether I was vegan or not vegan, I've always been eating clean. I've never been eating cheap, shitty food. And even when we were very broke, me and my brother, we would buy like a case of organic pasta or a big bag of organic rice. And then we would just each day scrounge together a couple of dollars and buy a head of cabbage or whatever and make some kind of thing out of those 2 ingredients, even when we were very, very poor, because we did believe in eating more whole foods.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in this around what, as you said, privilege. What is privilege really? And you're speaking to the choices that we all have to make at the end of the day. And somewhere down the line, someone's paying. And I want to understand, because you've said something really profound about the connection, the divine connection that our bodies have to life and that life has to us. And I'd like to just, for the listener, understand a little more about regenerative agriculture, this idea of like, why is it, what's better about it? You know, you've talked about building the soil, you've talked about the microbiome living inside the soil. So like, what happens? You moved onto this land and you've done better. You've created more life on that soil. I once heard a I think it might have been Ben Folks, possibly, who's a sort of permaculture leader and agriculturalist. And he talks about the problem with the eco-conscious concept is making less of a bad footprint. That's the general idea. It's like, let's do less bad and like make a smaller footprint. And he said, well, actually, if you think regeneratively, if you align with regenerative,
we need to make a bigger footprint.
Make a bigger footprint. And that was such a simple thing and so beautiful. So what is the bigger footprint, and what effect does it have on the land and therefore the food and therefore the people, like in that kind of construct?
So regenerative agriculture is really about growing the soil. And then whatever you're growing in the soil is like a byproduct, is like the whatever you're selling. But the real purpose is the soil. And so these principles are resting the soil, no-till or low-till, not disrupting. And you want to think about, imagine a coral reef, and then that's like all the microbiology in the soil. And then imagine that we cut through it with plows every year, and then we leave it fallow for 6 months of the year. That microbiology is dying back, and we're having less and less of it. So by leaving the land intact, leaving a ground cover, the mother is modest, I like to say, is one of the ways to do that, to add more microbiology. Another way is to integrate animals. Another way is biodiversity and permaculture, having more perennials and not just annuals. With all of these different things, we're creating like this beautiful black sponge of soil on the topsoil. So then we're sequestering more carbon. We're growing food that is more healthy for people because it's more microbiology, creates more NPK, or the nutrients in the soil become more available to the plants, and the plants can uptake it. And so it's all connected. And yeah, people say, oh, the footprint for regenerative agriculture is more space. You're going to need to graze more animals, blah, 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 blah. It's not true. It's literally just a blatant lie. The math that they're using to get to this number is whatever the existing stock density is, and then saying we need this many more acres. But if you take all the land for corn and soy that we're growing for cows, obviously pigs are separate, but if you take the corn and soy that's being grown for cows and sheep and goats, and even if we just did 1 or 2 rotations a year integrating into those systems, we don't even have to stop growing corn and soy, but we do a cover crop or something in between and we graze it, there's all this more land. And so that's the first reason why that's not true. The second reason why it's not true is because the stock density on regenerative, we do a high stock density mob grazing where we're moving our cows twice a day. So they're only on the land for a few hours, and then we move them and we move them and we move them. And then the soil recovers very, very quickly. But the other thing that happens is they're not just browsing and picking their favorite things. There's not much choice. So they're eating whatever's there. So it's evenly getting cut down. And so it can evenly come back rather than just like the non-desirables coming more and more. And then you eventually have to till it and plant new set. They're getting everything down. And so then the desirables can actually come back and be more prolific. But their saliva, their poop, and their pee is being concentrated in that small area. So think about right now, a dairy somewhere that has a lagoon filled with manure, and then they have to figure out how that they can move that onto the fields, and they're spraying it onto the fields, or they have to find, if they don't have enough fields, they have to find other places to take it or turn it into fertilizer. But another concept of regenerative agriculture is on-farm fertility, where you're using animals that are on the farm for the fertility for the crops. And so it's a system that all works together. Now, I want your listeners to imagine wherever they live, whatever the agricultural area it is. For me in California, it would be like driving on the 10 freeway or the 5 freeway up towards Northern California. You just see these fields and fields of kale, cilantro, cabbage, whatever it is, or even peaches, but just dead ground underneath it. A sterile environment with one plant in rows and rows and rows, perfect precision rows that a computer laid out. Well, that environment means that the soil only has whatever microbiology lives on the kale's root. There's no habitat. There's no rabbits and squirrels and voles and moles and like nothing like that living in those fields. So it's this sterile environment. And then we're eating that food out of that sterile environment. But if you imagine my farm or other permaculture and regenerative agriculture farms, we have corn growing with okra, growing with blueberries, growing, like all these things are growing together in these gardens. And then we have the cows out in the pasture and they're doing this pass very quickly. Then the grass is growing back up. But when I walk out into right now we have sorghum Sudan growing it's summer and on the field, you can't believe how many different kinds of grasshoppers and dung beetles and foxes, and there's arboreal foxes and rabbits and all coming out of that field. Now, if that was a hay field and I was spraying Roundup and growing Bermuda grass and then combine harvesting it and then feeding it to animals, none of that life would be getting established. But because the cows are literally just moving slowly across the field, and then they go back to the back field and do that again, and then come back to the orchard field and then go back to the main field again, this stuff is living in there. There's so much more life here than when I got here. And in California, my farm, I only had it for 5.5 years. We brought the soil from a 0.01% organic matter to more than 20% organic matter. I want to say that we had a massive amount of food waste coming from the restaurants that helped us do that. But we all have a massive amount of food waste going somewhere, and it could be going back to the farms. And so it's really about stacking functions. We're putting in a dairy, but we're also putting in a brewery. So the brewery will have regenerative organic grain to make beer, and then instead of throwing that to the landfill, that's going to come out and go right down and feed my dairy cows supplementally to the field. And so it's all interconnected, and it all has this like beautiful way of growing more life. Does that mean nothing ever dies? No. Nature is brutal. I had a cow just die the other day of some infection, and it was intense and rapid. And I have had neighbor dogs kill a whole herd of sheep at one time. I have had lions kill multiple sheep before they decide which one they're going to pull out of the pen and take. None of us blame the lion for killing 3 goats before she takes this one. That's just her nature. Well, we are all part of that nature. And I can say I don't choose to eat meat because I never have, and it's not part of my food ecosystem that I'm used to. But I cannot say that I'm causing less death with my diet. That is the lie. And so we have to realize we can eat whatever resonates with our body based on where we live. But we cannot believe that that choice makes us immune from the death that is being caused in the agricultural system. It is literally on all of us to shift the agricultural system to less suffering. It is all of our responsibility to shift the agricultural system to less suffering and less abuse. And by just saying, I'm not going to eat meat, it literally doesn't do that, because we're just creating more and more monocrops. Everything in the vegan diet is grown in huge fields and harvested, and there's no life. There's no integration. It feels good to say, I'm not eating any flesh. I'm not a murderer. It's just not true. Do I still have a hard time when we send an animal to be harvested? Yes. Do I still have a hard time when my husband is harvesting an animal? Yes. It's not my nature. It's not, it doesn't resonate with me. But if you don't have a hard time when you send some animals to harvest, then you're completely disconnected from what's happening. It is a sacrifice, but there's so many sacrifices in life. Those women getting cancer and some of them dying to pick your strawberries is a sacrifice. Working jobs that are intimately connected to chemicals is a sacrifice for our food system. There is human sacrifice just like there is animal sacrifice in the food system. And there is no way to separate ourselves. So what we have to do is jump in with both feet and say, how can I create less suffering, more life, the highest quality of health for the animals and the humans that I'm immediately responsible for or live in community with or live in community around.
It's a beautiful invitation. And I also hear in what you've been sharing the challenge of where you yourself have really stepped up into this space and now are having the challenges around the finances. For those who are listening and who are inspired and want to support regenerative agriculture, what are some practical ways that they can start doing that, even if they maybe don't have access to farms or land or don't own a restaurant, etc.? What are some ways they can help to bring more life and more sustainability and more health to them and those around them?
I hate the word sustainability just because I think it means to sustain how we are. So I'm just going to point that out. I'm trying to eradicate sustainability as a word in the movement. Not correcting you, but I'm just sharing my view on sustainability. People ask me this all the time. What can I do? The consumer dollar is the most powerful. You vote every day. And I vote for shitty stuff every day. And I vote for good stuff every day. Like I buy parrot food. I have parrots. I buy parrot food on Amazon, gets delivered to the house. The other day, my husband was flying to LA. He's like, I don't have any city clothes, honey. All my clothes have poop all over them and grease. And I'm like, okay, and I ordered him some jeans on Amazon, right? Like we all succumb to spending our dollars on things we don't support. But can we spend the majority of our dollars on things we do support? Can you find a meat box from a regenerative farm and pay the shipping and whatever that, and a little bit more to the farmer? Can we do the little extra to go to the farmer's market or go to the farm stand to pick up the eggs, to pick up these things? That matters. That is bringing back our resilience and giving up a little bit of our convenience. And so that's what I think. And then if anybody has money that they want to put into something like this, we're still raising money for this. So it's a hospitality. We have a restaurant on the farm. We have a brewery, dairy. It's all integrated and all together. And we're still raising money. So if there's someone that's like, I want to support this, you can go to our website and see that there's a deck at sovereigntyranch.com. And I'd be happy to have a phone conversation with you about that. And if this is super far away for you, find someone locally and support them and make a deal. Like, hey, I'm living in the city and I've got this job and I'm a doctor or I'm a lawyer and I have to live here, but I really want the food that you're creating. How can I support you? Is there something else I can do besides just buying the food? And support this in happening. It is the greatest and most important thing of our time. The way that the current environmental movement is going is all just carbon. It's just like a carbon scam. It's not going to make any difference, but it's going to make a lot more people rich. Regenerative agriculture is not all over every single channel like Teslas and windmills and solar panels are, because nobody can get rich from regenerative agriculture. This is about reconnecting with nature and growing food that grows healthy people and healthy animals. And so if you're driving a Tesla and have solar panels on your roof and paid the upgrade to get your power from the wind, I applaud you that you're trying. But honestly, my cows are way better for the environment than your Tesla. And if you think your Tesla is better than cows, I just want to invite you to do some critical thinking. How could something that's made and is never going to biodegrade and never go away somehow be better for the planet than the greatest technology in taking an unedible thing and making it into high quality, nutrient dense food that has every vitamin, everything that we need to survive in it? The cow is the greatest technology on the planet. It sequesters carbon, it makes food, and it takes areas that we cannot grow anything for human consumption in and turns it into the highest quality food, milk, dairy, meat, leather, and it sequesters carbon. So start supporting regenerative cattle ranchers. That is the call of our time. And nobody's going to get rich off of it, but we can make a living if the consumers support us.
Yeah, there's a beautiful saying that, speaking of local people, most of my audience is actually listening from America, Canada, Europe, etc. Here in South Africa, we have one of the farmers, his name is actually Farmer Angus. I think he was in finance or some gnarly business stuff in the cities and had his own awakening at some point some years ago, and has been doing regenerative agriculture for a while. And on his wall, in huge letters on the outside of the building, he has a Wendell Berry quote, which says, "We are all farmers by proxy." When I read that, it just hit me. It's like, we are all farmers by association. No matter who you are, no matter how deep in some city, the middle of a city, you are a part of the farming system. So which system are you supporting? The chemical system or the regenerative system? And those are basically the choices. And of course, as you've just said so well, Mollie, it's like we're all compromising. We all buy shit. But what percentage? What are we prioritizing? So I love that you've shared that.
And Wendell Berry was one of my he has a quote about every plate. There's death on every plate. And that, to be alive is to be in reverence of what died for you to live. And can we remember that every time we eat? I'm paraphrasing and chopping it up and terrible, not as eloquent as he said it, but he did speak to that.
Yeah.
I would say we have to support the people that are doing the work. I'm going to say one more thing, and this is going to be controversial. I lived in a country club estates with a pool and a gated community, totally comfortable life. And I didn't necessarily want to give up that totally comfortable life. But it's going to take more Mollies. It's going to take more people that say, and this gentleman you're talking about that was in finance, we need more people doing it. Stop waiting for someone else to do it. The government is not going to save us. There is nobody coming to save us. Like when I look at the sperm count of a man in 2040 is going to be 0. And I have 3 sons, but 2 little sons. There's nobody coming to save them and take the chemicals out of their food. It's just up to us to create the new systems. And it is not easy to live in community. It is not easy to farm. It is not easy to do any of those things. But I was actually talking to someone this morning, I won't say what their name is, but someone that lived in the city and was working in a job where he was mostly on a computer every single day. And he struggles from attention deficit disorder. He was on pharmaceuticals since high school for those things. And then through the pandemic and lost his insurance and something and started using harder drugs to try to get whatever that experience he was getting from the Adderall. And he's now living on a farm, working full-time on a farm, making barely any money. And he's waking up with the sun. Not only is he not using the harder drugs that he was addicted to, but he's not using any of the pharmaceuticals he's been using since high school. The suffering I asked, so the suffering, your internal suffering that had you feel like you needed to do those things on a scale of 1 to 10. And he was like, it's 90% calmed down. So this is someone who struggled with depression, struggled with drugs, struggled with needing drugs from pharmaceuticals to deal with their ADHD and their anxiety, is now not taking any of those and has far less money, less security, less all of these things. But his joy and his comfort in his own skin is 90% better, according to him. And so that is a beautiful testament to what we think everybody needs. We think we need money. And we do need to make this work. I need money. But there's many community members that are here that are doing a work trade, that are getting paid a stipend, that are whatever those other arrangements are. And they don't have the pressure that I have of the money. And there's a lot of benefits. So even if you think I can't go buy a farm, of course, not many people can't, but there's many systems where you can go. There's the woofer system. There's all different ways that you can go and be on a farm, and you get to eat the food and live there and be in the world of it without the heavy responsibility of the farm. And on some level, that is a freedom. Even if it seems like, no, because I have to live in community, I have to share, make decisions with people. No, there's actually, talking to this friend this morning, I realized there's some beautiful freedom in what he's experiencing.
Thank you for offering that invitation to people and to all of us. I know that that's definitely an invitation for me as well. I have a friend just down the road, a beautiful man. He's a lifelong musician. He's one of the most skilled, talented musicians I've ever met. He plays so many instruments. And some years ago, he was watching the world and seeing the way things were going, and he made a call, and he's bought into a farm and now raises beautiful chickens. We get our eggs from him, best eggs ever. He's got cows coming in, and it's hard as fuck. I mean, he's actually currently gone off to play some professional music to help to raise funds, which is something not many musicians will say, I'm going to go play music to raise money. Like, usually you have to do something else. But in his case, as someone who's now getting into farming, as he's sharing with me, he's like, it's really hard to make any money. And yet it's like the benefits are so many that he's getting out of that are beyond the financial side. So it makes it worth it. And everything you've just said is an encouragement to him and to me and to anyone listening to like do what we can, basically do what we can. So yeah, thank you for that.
And nobody can do it alone. And so we all need community, and all the pieces are important. We have a meeting every week, and we go around and we say one thing that we want to apologize for, one request. It could be of a specific person or of the community. And then one thing that we can take responsibility for moving forward, shifting it or whatever like that. And it does take work to be in community. People get small. No matter how good life is, people get small and get pissed about little things. And so you just have to create a space to have that get purged out. My husband calls it an energy plunger. He's like, oh, I think we need to have an energy plunger and plunge out the negative energy that's there. But it's worth it. Like, the work it takes is worth it. To be honest, we're all going to be a slave to something. We all are born into the money slave system. We're mostly slaves to money and to our governments. But if we're going to be a slave to something anyways, you're going to be dominated by something. We might as well do something every day that we love. And no matter how stressed out I feel, how overwhelmed, how scared about stuff, I'm never looking at the clock and wanting the day to be over. I'm always like, oh, it's dark already. And so I want to invite people, no matter what you're doing, if you're looking at the clock in your day and you're saying, oh, 2 more hours, 3 more hours. I never do that in my life. And that is the win. No matter how much work, no matter how much stress, no matter how much tears, blood, sweat, and tears go into all of it, I've never do that. And that is the beauty of living your passion, living a life where your play and your joy and your work and your family is all integrated. That is the beauty. I want to invite everybody to do something that they love as much as I love regenerative agriculture. And then I want to invite everybody to support regenerative agriculture because it's a pathway forward that makes so much sense, but there's no oligarchy that can be created out of a stroke of a pen. And now everybody's going to make millions on solar panels. So we, the people, have to drive this mission forward. So I ask you humbly to support myself. If you're here in the States, we have a farm store. We're launching the meat. We have lamb and pork and beef launching on September 1st. And then we have vinegar and other products that we make, popcorn, tortillas. Please shop from our store and invest in farmers if you can. We are always struggling to get the next piece of equipment we need or whatever it is. So please support this. And please find your life that you love, no matter how hard it is, that you still get up and love it every day.
Thank you. And I, of course, we'll share links to you and where people can support you in the show notes. So please do check that if you're listening and you want to get involved, and it's just a click away. Okay. And as we come to the end, I think you've spoken to it so much in this conversation, but when you hear we are already free, what does that bring up for you?
I actually feel a little sad. Like, I feel like that's not my experience. I want it to be my experience. And I see all these pathways that different people are changing their status or getting to be a, common law and doing this and doing that. But like, in theory, I was born of God and I'm free. But in many ways, I feel very trapped by the system. And people will look at my life and say, well, trapped by the system, you're living the thing. And yes, but I gave up my farm in California. I ran from tyranny, essentially, because there was no viable way forward. The county just was on me about every single thing. And they wanted, $500,000 worth of work on the farm to bring my codes, code violations. And I put those in quotation marks because they're municipal codes. They were never voted on by the people. They can put a lien against your property. They told me that if I removed all of my tiny homes that my workers lived in, the farm worker housing, and put it on the street, disconnected from sewer and electricity and water, then they would be unhoused people and they wouldn't be able to bother them. So just let that sink in. The same people that are talking about equity and fairness are saying that I should put people in non-sanitary conditions because that is not against their rules. I'm just going to move their tiny house to the street and then it's an RV that an unhoused person is living in. That's crazy pants. You cannot live in an RV in Ventura County, but if you are in an RV on the street and you're an unhoused person, then they can't do anything about it. But if you're living on a farm, connected to septic, connected to water, connected to power, being able to drink raw milk and eat fresh avocados and oranges and eggs from the farm and meat from the farm, that's a problem. And I asked why, and they said because a child burned in an RV in Ventura County died. Yeah, people die. Stop using safety to control us. So anyways, I say that I, during the pandemic, ran from the tyranny trying to make me safe. I don't need the government to make me safe. And so I want to already be free and I want to envision that. And I always talk about we're co-creating our future. So let's not co-create what we don't like. Let's put our attention on that we are free beings and that we have to create new systems. But it's also heartbreaking what the current system has taken away from me. My restaurants were in a deal for $25 million when the pandemic hit, and that all fell apart. And so now they're just closing because I can't make payroll. So it's hard to feel like we're already free when I feel that the government has really taken a lot from me over the last 4 years.
Well, thank you, Mollie. I appreciate you sharing that so honestly and openly. I think there's such an important part of this process that we're all navigating in various ways is grieving the loss. And actually one of my first guests is a woman named Emily Saldaya, Free Birth Society. She is one of the creators of Free Birth.
Yes, I'm familiar with her.
Yeah, and she said when this came up, I don't even know if I asked her the question because it was one of the very first episodes, but she said something about it. She's like, your podcast says we're already freed. She said, we're literally not. We are born into a prison system. Most people, like all of us to some extent, but those especially who are born into a hospital system in a medicalized way, you're literally born into a prison. You're injected, you're pulled away from your loving care of your mother. And in my own experience and some of the transformational journeys I've been on with plant medicines in these various states, part of that process is coming to see how much has been lost, how much has been taken, and to mourn that and grieve that and really just be in that. So yeah, I hear you. I can't imagine what it's like to have put your whole life into something so precious and then to see it made impossible by an actual insane system. As Krishnamurti said, it's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. It's no sign of being like you're not healthy if you're well adjusted to our society as it is. That's not health. I hear you and I feel you and I appreciate your reflections. And I appreciate that even with that, knowing that and feeling that and navigating those challenges, like here you are showing up in such a powerful way for a different way of living and of being in the world. So thank you.
Do you want to hear a plant medicine story or do you want to end the podcast?
Let's do a plant medicine story.
You know, my mother's an ayahuasca shaman. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
She has a church in Maui. But this is not an ayahuasca story. When I was in my early 30s, I just divorced my first husband. And my dad was doing a land ceremony on his farm in Northern California with one of the 13 indigenous grandmothers, the Mexican one. And so it was mushrooms. And I just agreed to do it. It was a family thing. He wanted everybody there. When he purchased the land, the previous owner had killed herself on the property. He just wanted to check in with the land, ask the forgiveness of the land, or ask permission to be there and do what he was doing, and ask the energy to be moved on from that woman's suffering and not to have that carry on. So everybody came. I came with my boyfriend at the time, and there was a fire and a ceremony. And somewhere early in the ceremony, I got hit by my choice when I was younger to have abortion. And I had an abortion as if it was like a root canal. I had an abortion like it was nothing. My mother had abortions. I grew up in a very liberal town, in a liberal world. It was not a big deal. I was pregnant by someone I shouldn't be pregnant by, and I just made it go away. It was that simple. I never thought about it again. I just went about my life. And I didn't even think I had any sadness. I didn't think I had any feelings about it. And I heard this very loud voice with love and compassion, but very firm, ask if I believed I knew better than the divinity of all. And obviously I can't say I think I know better than the divinity of all of it. And I said no. And then it just kept showing fetuses and blood, and then this ripple and ripple and ripple effect, and then pulling the fetus out, and that the interconnected of humanity, and that by pulling one person out, it changes the whole fabric, and then the fabric of all of humanity changes colors. And when you're pulling one and pulling and pulling, and all these fetuses getting pulled out, and the colors of the humanity changing. And I'm like, it's like the gnarliest, like, normally I feel like ayahuasca has more. I feel like mushrooms have always been a kind and gentle medicine and a laughing medicine and let me feel good. And this was not that. And my uncle, I could see him walking across the field. I assume in real life he was walking across the field, and he was going from an old man to a fetus and back up to an old man and to a fetus and a young man and like this. And I don't know if I said it out loud or in my head or whatever, but I said, what do you want from me? What do you want? Like, what do you? And this voice said, I want you to never make that choice again. Never convince anyone else to make that choice again. And never contribute financially to that choice being made. And I said, okay, but I'm not going to be one of those pro-life people. I said, I'm not going to be a pro-life person. And I never talked to almost anybody about this. I lived in a world where this is it's a woman's rights issue, and there would be no listening for it. So I just held this inside, and people asked what I got out of the ceremony. And I just said, a lot of, cleaning up stuff from my past and getting complete. And I didn't say anything about it. Years later, my dad comes to me and tells me that he had an ayahuasca journey with all the abortions he had with my mom, and that like he had to bet, promise to never and blah, 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 blah. Almost exactly the same thing. Never do it again. And then they wanted him to reverse his vasectomy, even though he was not going to continue to have children, but that it was not, the vasectomy was not the business. So I go on with my life, and my ex-husband is going through a hard time. His best friend dies. He comes into the restaurant one night. We get into an argument in the restaurant. I'm crying. I'm not a drinker. I go to the back. I'm crying in the pizza station at the restaurant. And a young cook that's worked for me for a long time goes and gets me a margarita. I drink the margarita. I drink 2 margaritas. I go about with my business. And that cook says, I'm going to drive you home. I end up sleeping with this guy. He's 23 years old, 13 years younger than me, does not speak any English. I tell him the next morning, do not ever tell anybody this happened. I'm your boss. I'm a grown-up. You're 23. I'm 36. Never tell anybody this happened ever, ever, ever again. 2 weeks later, I'm pregnant. And I know that I promised God. I know. So I tell a couple of people, they're like, it was a hallucination. You can't change your whole life because of this. He doesn't even speak English. My mom's like deep down the rabbit hole. She's like, you don't even know who he is. You don't know. Like everybody is like, this is a terrible idea. And I literally have gone against God when I knew it was against God in my lifetime. And I know the consequences. It's never good. When you don't know, I think you can get away with it. When you know that something is against, then you cannot get away with it. And so I go to him and I say, you have to break up with that girl at the host stand. We have to get married. And he's like 23 and he's like, what do you mean we're going to get married? He doesn't speak English. We're translating through Google Translate. And we get married. This was October or something. We get married on Thanksgiving, November 28th. I was pregnant, 5 weeks pregnant in early October. So anyways, we have the most awkward Christmas. My family comes to town. It's just like super awkward. He doesn't speak English. He moves out of his wherever he was living, like comes with 2 trash bags of stuff. And we're now married. And our vows were like, you may think this is crazy, but we're asking our community to not speak diminish of us, don't speak negatively, and empower this to work. Like literally is what our vows were. It wasn't like we love each other, whatever. And I lose the baby in January.
Oh my God.
And so 5 months in, I lose the baby, or 4 months, October, November, December, January, 4 months in, I lose the baby. And everybody's like, you're free. You did what God wanted and he freed you. And I'm like, it can't be that that's what I was supposed to do. But I'm just like, I'm in the inquiry though. Like he drinks every night. He's super young. Like this is not what I imagined my life to be. And we go to this group, an Indian group comes to the restaurant and caters this big, like rents out the restaurant. And they ask for us to come out, me and him, the cooks, to come out and to be acknowledged in front of the group. And so once they acknowledge us, I ask them, the patriarch and matriarch, it's their 50th wedding anniversary of this family that's taking up the restaurant. And I said, what makes you a good couple for 50 years? What has you still be in love or whatever? And the woman said, we were an arranged marriage. So I'm never looking backwards to how he was. I'm always looking forward to who we can be. And we are building our love, and we are building our family, and we are building for tomorrow. And I never am thinking, I remember when he used to buy me flowers or anything like that. It's always, how can we be better next year? How can we be building more of this in the future? And someone translated that to my husband. And that night, he texted me via Google Translate or whatever and said, maybe that baby arranged our marriage. And maybe we should try to have another baby. So I got pregnant very quickly. And it has not been easy, but it's 11 years later. And we love each other more than almost any of my friends' marriages. I would say that we have the best marriage. It is all built. Came from a tiny village in Mexico. Culturally, we have nothing in common. We didn't have any foundation of commonality. We've built everything. We were different ages, commitment to food, ingredients, nothing was the same. And we've had to build everything. And we love each other very much. Like my husband is brought to tears on a regular basis, acknowledging who he would be if he had not married me versus who he would be. And I also recognize that who I would be if I had not married him was also very different. During the pandemic, a teenager shows up at our farm for a volunteer day. He's from Guatemala. He was an unaccompanied minor during the Trump administration, reconnected with his parents, and essentially very quickly asked if he could live with us, which is a bold move for a teenager that doesn't speak very good English and does not know us at all. But for whatever reason, my heart felt that we should take him in. And his heart, he saw my YouTube channel, and that's why he used $70 to take a taxi to go to a volunteer day at our farm. And we adopted him. He's our child now, and he's 22. And the timing puts him about 16 months after my abortion. So I believe that my child that I rejected, that soul, found their way back to me because I listened to what was requested of me. And the family that I have today is because I listened and had radical faith that God had my back, that divinity, nature, all of it had my back. And that if I trust, that it will come back. And so when we're taking a journey, whether it be ibogaine, ayahuasca, mushrooms, peyote, I think that we do open up ourselves chemically to hear the divine. But that doesn't mean that we can't hear the divine every day when we connect ourselves to nature. And so I just want to invite people to have radical faith in trusting yourself. And part of why we have such overreaching governments, and they're in every interaction with us, is we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust God. We don't trust each other. So I want to invite you to, no matter if you're like, I'm always going to be pro-choice, that's fine. I'm not saying what anybody should be, but invite yourself to trust what you're hearing. That's all I want to ask. That's my plant medicine story.
Wow. That just brought me to tears of just completely overwhelmed with the message that you've just shared. I don't really have anything to, well, I don't have anything to add to that. There's nothing to add to that. That is an incredible story. And I mean, I felt like I went into a psychedelic state when you were telling that story. It felt like I was on the outside listening to something that like someone had written this story that I would like, what? No way. Like that's like, I can't believe you came up with that storyline. Thank you so much. That really, it's what I needed to hear right now.
And if anybody's interested, my adopted son has a Instagram channel called Osmar_Journey. Osmar is journey with an underscore. And you can follow him. He loves regenerative agriculture. He moves the cows every day. And he's just so inspired. Oh, he Googled. So how he found me is he Googled, can a food in the USA make you sick? And he found Dr. Mark Hyman. Dr. Mark Hyman told him about regenerative agriculture, and he reached out to the biggest little farm, Apricot Lane. They said he wasn't old enough to volunteer. Apparently, we didn't have an age group limit. We probably should have had an age limit for volunteering, but we didn't have one. And so he literally came that one day and left, and then he came the next weekend to volunteer, and he never left again.
Mollie, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing that forward. I'm so glad that I mentioned plant medicine and that you invited that into the space. I am going to so highly recommend that people listen to this episode when it comes out. I wish that I could like force people sometimes to like some certain episodes when we're like, I'm having this chat and I'm just going like, everybody I know has to listen to this. So I just hope, I hope people take my recommendation and have joined us up to this point in this listening, because there's so much gold here.
Everybody's going to come to everything when it's their time. Exactly. And we can't, I talk about this with Bitcoin, like everybody's going to pay for Bitcoin, whatever is their price they're meant to pay. I can't force people to think outside of the box and see how Bitcoin can free us from the money slave system. I just can't. So I've had to surrender that people will come to whatever they come to at the time that they come to it. And that is the price that they were meant, or that is the time that they were meant to hear that message. That's true for me. Apparently, I have a friend who made a documentary about Bitcoin when it was like $1, and I didn't look at it. I didn't watch it. And I was like growing marijuana, had tons of money, just fucking going to Vegas and tricking off money. If I had just spent $100 on Bitcoin, but that was not my time. You know, I came into Bitcoin at the $3,000 to $9,000 time. And that was what the price I was meant to hear it at. You could tell people to read books. You could tell people to look it up. You could tell people to, Bitcoin solves this thing that you're talking about, but it's literally, you can't force them. And that's, I'm just bringing that up because that's my experience about Bitcoin, is like your thing about, I just want people to listen to this episode. Yeah. I was like crazy with that book, Everything Divided by 21 Million. I was trying to get everybody to listen to it. And finally I was like, just stop. I was crazy about it.
Well, thank you for the...
If anybody hasn't listened to the book...
Yeah, you're still recommending it. I need to listen to the book, clearly. That's a whole topic of conversation. But thank you again, Mollie. I really honoring your time and your willingness to hop on and be so enthusiastic and share yourself so openly. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on We Are Already Free. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you for being out there and spreading the word and really encouraging people to consider our freedom, because the enslavement can only persist if we're not present to it.
Thank you for joining us today on this journey with Mollie Engelhart. I hope you're walking away with a renewed sense of what's really possible, whether it's reconnecting with the soil beneath our feet, understanding the delicate balance of life, or the power of embracing change in both ourselves and the land. Mollie reminded us that regeneration isn't just about the earth, it's also about our own spirits, our communities, and how we nourish ourselves in every sense. Please do visit the show notes for the links to Mollie's work, to her restaurant, to how you can support her, and find local farmers in your area you can support, and let's make this change together. It takes the action of all of us as individuals coming together within our own communities, and let's do this thing. If today's conversation sparked something in you, maybe a desire to dig deeper, heal more fully, or embrace resilience in your own life, then I have something that might be just the right next step for you. Mollie spoke beautifully today about the importance of resilience, both in the way we treat the earth and in how we treat ourselves. And just like healthy soil provides the foundation for all life, creating a strong morning routine can lay the groundwork for a more empowered, peaceful you. That's why I'd love to invite you to my 5-day morning practice challenge. This challenge is designed to help you kickstart your day with clarity and intention, something that can truly help you thrive in a world that often pulls us away from ourselves. Take Adrienne, for example, who was waking up every day feeling stuck and hopeless. After joining the challenge, Adrienne found a way to transform those heavy mornings into moments of self-love and acceptance. Instead of waking up feeling like something was wrong, he now starts each day with a sense of peace, confidence, and motivation. As Adrienne said, the big difference is how Nathan keeps it simple, accessible, and very supportive. This is about helping you feel safe, grounded, and ready for whatever life brings. Or like Emma, who found herself struggling with motivation and an overactive mind. Through the simple, value-packed lessons of the challenge, she discovered a way to regain her spark and get back on track, all in just a few minutes each morning. If you're ready to take that next step, to create a life that's more aligned, more resilient, and more free, then join me in the 5-day morning practice challenge. It's completely free, and you can sign up at the link in the show notes. Let's grow together. Thanks again for listening. It's such an honor to be on this journey with you. I truly love being me with you. Until next time, let's keep rethinking, keep healing, and remember, we are already free.